Welcome to Beer and Iron, where we talk about real cast iron cooking and share recipes with beer as an ingredient. Grab a beer, set that cast iron on the heat, and get ready to flip your expectations. We're serving up tales and recipes that are well seasoned and never half-baked. I'm Sulae, meal muse and brew tale bandit, here to share a story, cook something worth savoring, and turn your cast iron number 8 into a canvas for culinary creativity. This is where the good stories live. I was 22 when I rolled into Blytheville, Arkansas in the winter of 1992. A pipe fitter helper with a blue hard hat, a number 8 cast iron skillet, a thrift store hot plate, and an ice chest full of groceries I hoped would last a few days. I'd just come off a shutdown where I got laid off the moment the last weld cooled. That's how it worked. You worked until the job was done, and then you were done. Job sites weren't the military, but they had a rank structure that felt familiar from my Army days. I was a helper, the bottom rung, basically a private. The pipe fitters, they were like sergeants. The safety man, he was like the MP. The foremen in the white hard hats were like colonels, the kind that didn't have to explain themselves. There was this one old guy with a limp and a gimpy leg, one of the few hard-case 50-year-olds still hanging on in construction. His name was Worm, I kid you not. On that first day, when the foreman was calling roll, he said,
"I don't answer to anything but worm."
He was the kind of old man who outlived every bad decision he ever made, and for some reason, he took a liking to me. Maybe because, at 22, I looked like a young man with a bright future in making my own regrettable life choices. When I got laid off and had no idea where I'd work next, he told me,
"Go to Blytheville. Tell 'em Worm sent you. They'll hire you."
I almost asked, worm what? Just in case there was more than one worm, and the Blytheville boys needed help sorting them out. But that thought died before it ever made it to my tongue.
"This is my last job, but you got time."
At the gate on our last day, while we stood there waiting for the guy to check us out and to make sure our lunch coolers didn't have anything that didn't belong to us, he added,
"Son, this ain't a future. If you like 12-hour shifts and working day after day, go be a nurse. At least you'll be working inside. Out here, you're dealing with plumbing that carries nitromethane. In a hospital, you'll be dealing with plumbing too, that's for sure. At my age, it's been my plumbing them nurses had to deal with. But at least there's a different kind of methane running through those pipes."
Anyway, what kind of plumbing did nurses have to deal with, I wondered. I was naive enough not to know, and naive enough to think this man had to be rich. He wasn't even 60 and was already talking retirement. Meanwhile, my folks were knocking on 50's front door, and neither one of them were anywhere near done working. So what did he mean, construction ain't got a future? The man was retiring, and even before 60. I still had a lot to learn. But I did take his advice about Blytheville, and that winter changed everything. Back then, construction workers didn't book motels. They just drove around until they found a neon sign that wasn't flickering too bad. I picked one bragging American-owned, because the other place looked like it charged extra for clean sheets. The room was basic, one buzzing fluorescent light, one wall heater that sounded like it was chewing gravel, and a rock-hard bed with a burgundy comforter and 2 pillows. I set out my thrift store hot plate, crowned it with my cast iron number 8. I set my griddle near, my dented aluminum percolator, my bag of clothes, and the ice chest, my only refrigerator. I had picked up frozen hash browns, frozen bell peppers, a little sausage, a dozen eggs, some foil, and 6 beers for the next 3 nights. I figured I'd make 6 breakfast tacos, 3 for breakfast in the morning and 3 for tomorrow's lunch. Well, what about tomorrow's dinner? We'd worry about that later. I didn't know how to fold a burrito back then. I didn't learn that until 1994 when I met my wife, a former fast food make-a-run-for-the-border chef with elite teenage-era credentials. She taught me the art of the roll and how to make a burrito. So breakfast tacos it was. And the aluminum foil, that was my insurance policy. It caught everything that fell out of the back end of those tacos, and those little spillings made for a fine last bite or two. Plus, at the fast food joint, I always asked for extra plasticware in taco sauce packets. Those little red packets were solid gold. Figured I was good. Finished most of my beer, and then I was ready for bed. Tomorrow was going to be a good first day. Since the Army, I learned that getting up early was the best way to get my bearings. Even when I got up on time, I still felt rushed. Like everybody else already knew something I didn't. And this was my first day on a new job. I needed to make a good impression. First thing, I got the coffee going on one burner of my 2-coil hot plate. I shaved, showered, and shaved again. You know, SSS. Then I poured myself a cup of coffee. I moved the hot percolator over to the other burner, the one that wasn't on yet. Then I made my breakfast with my number 8 cast iron skillet on the hot burner while I enjoyed my first cup of coffee. I browned the sausage, cooked the green onions, hash browns, and peppers, cracked in the eggs. I added the last swallow from last night's beer, turned the burner down to low, and covered the skillet with my cast iron griddle, using it as a lid so the eggs could poach in the steam from the beer. I figured I'd go ahead and crank the car, let it warm up in the morning cold, and stow my gear for my first day. That car wasn't used to weather like this, and northern Arkansas was having a real winter. I was about 350 miles north of Monroe, Louisiana, where snow was rare, and growing up, school snow days were mostly wishful thinking. My car lights were still on from the drive-in the night before, and I just left them on. I had a sweet parking spot right outside my room. Mine was the only room lit up with my headlights. I checked the eggs, and they were doing just fine. The whites were set, and the yolks were well on their way. So I turned up the heat a bit and tossed in the cheese. While it melted, I figured I'd go ahead and warm the coffee back up and fill up my green Stanley thermos for the first break that morning. I twisted the knob for that second burner and heard the coffee start to come back to life. Things were going great. I started putting together my 6 tacos. Pop! Black. Everything went dark. Heater died, the lights died, the burner died. I looked outside to see what was going on. Even the motel sign had gone dark. A little wind, a little snow falling. Dang, I thought. Must be the weather. Funny thing, though. The rest of the town around the dark motel looked lit up and just fine. The only light left was coming from my car's headlights, shining through the window behind the curtains. Ah, I thought, no worries. The coffee was still hot, and my breakfast was basically done. The cheese had already melted from the heat in the skillet, so I built 6 tacos. That first bite, y'all, oh man, I tell you what, I sat there in that motel room lit by my car headlights, steam rising off those tacos, the cheese soft and rich, the eggs and sausage still hot enough to fog the air in front of me, and it felt like I was eating at the finest restaurant on this side of a power outage. The tortillas were warm in my hands, and the taco sauce was sharp and salty. And for a few minutes, that little room felt about as good as life could get. I felt like a king for sure. Well, if kings ate breakfast in steel-toed boots by headlight, I could have eaten all 6 right then and there. But I knew lunch would come, yeah? So 3 of these beautiful tacos were wrapped up in foil for lunch, and then I put them in my Carhartt jacket pocket. I grabbed my half-drunk cup of coffee, my coffee-filled thermos, and I looked around the room one last time to make sure everything was secure and off. Mama always warned me about those hot plates. And then I hit the road for the job site. When I got to the job site parking area and the bus pickup, I was the only one there. The big bus was already warming up, steam curling out of the tailpipe. I climbed on the bus with the driver and one other fella, the foreman. The 3 of us traded a quiet good morning, and I took a seat. After enough time passed to feel like the others should have been there by now, the foreman turned around with a loud vinyl seat squeak and asked,
"Hey, where's everybody else?"
I shrugged. How was I supposed to know? He radioed the other foreman. They radioed the safety man. Eventually, voices started crackling back with panic, then anger, then confusion. They'd hired a dozen guys, and I was the only one that showed up. For a moment, the foreman softened. He let his guard down just a hair. like he was relieved that at least one man made it in.
You pipe fitter?
He asked. No, sir. Helper, I said.
How long you been a helper?
I'd only worked one job, and that lasted 6 months. But on paper, I had 5.5 years of experience. No, don't judge me. No, not too much anyway. I knew where he was going. He seemed to figure that with at least one man, he could get something started today. I could have said 6 months and kept his expectations in check, but I probably would have gotten found out and then sent packing straight back to the gate. Saying 5.5 years out loud felt different than it did writing it down on that application. So I told him, only 5 years.
Oh, dang. You look young to have that much experience.
He paused, studied me for a second, then smiled.
Yeah, you'll do.
I'll do what? I thought. When we got to the site, it was just me and the foreman. The mood was relaxed, almost friendly. There were no other men around to put on a show for, so we men talked the way men talk when nobody's performing for a masculine audience. 2 hours later, after we'd already drunk all of our coffee that we brought for the first break, the rest of the crew finally rolled in. They were cold, angry, and muttering about how the motel power had gone out in the night. Alarm clocks were dead. Heaters were dead. Coffee pots were dead. I just nodded sympathetically, never once connecting the dots. We all got to work right away. The cold, the light snow, and the wind made the day's work feel heavier than it already was. I was standing near a forklift with lull painted on the telescoping boom. A lull looked less like something from a loading dock and more like a squat, hard-working machine with oversized tires and a front end that could reach up and out like a mechanical arm. It was holding a long section of 12-inch heavy pipe over a deep concrete cooling tank, maybe 50 feet by 30, and 30 or 40 feet deep, and with partially frozen water at the bottom. The pipe fitter became frustrated. He had to reach over the tank's guardrail, hands stiff with cold, trying to level the pipe against those icy steel forks. Finally, fed up, he yanked off his gloves, tossed them into his tool bag, climbed over that guardrail, and stepped out onto the slick forks. Rubber-soled steel toes on ice, 20 or 30 feet above the water below. Down there, the water showed through the cracks of the surface ice, dark ash gray over dirty water, with patches of white where the snow hadn't soaked in yet. He leaned in to line up that pipe with the one rising from the tank below. Those pits were deep, like I said, 30, maybe 40 feet down, with about 10 feet of water at the bottom. That water wasn't supposed to be there, not yet anyways. Blyville had had a wet fall, and the winter was turning out to be wetter. I knew the safety man was always around, kind of like a ninja in a white hard hat. Watching that fitter step out there on those forks, I figured I'd offer a friendly reminder. Fella, you want your harness? I'll grab it for... I didn't get to finish. He snapped back at me quick.
Don't you give me no lip, helper. Know your place.
He didn't even finish either. His foot slipped. He fell, straight down into that icy pit. I watched him the whole way down. I remember every second, every reach, like the air itself might hand him something to grab hold of. Then the crack of his back hitting that ice. His arms and legs flaring out like a gingerbread man on a cookie sheet. His body disappeared into that ashy water. Nothing. Nothing just for a second. And in that second, a whole lot of thought. Then he busted through the ice with a screaming yell.
Ah! Help!
He tried to find footing. No use. Water was too deep. Down he went again. Back up. He tried to climb onto a thin shelf of ice. Crack. It broke. Under again. Up again. Gasping, yelling, clawing at anything that might hold. Each time the ice gave way, until finally he reached and grabbed onto the very pipe he'd been trying to set and held on like his life depended on it. It did. The foreman was already on the radio calling for the crane.
Bring the crane over to the north side, fast. We've got a man in the pit.
The rest of us scrambled for ropes and harnesses, tying whatever we could together. By the time we got enough length, the crane had arrived and lowered its headache ball down into the pit with him. He hooked both legs over it and clung to the cable. Up he went, over the edge, and then collapsed down into the mud. There wasn't anywhere dry to put him. Guys started stripping off their jackets to cover him up. I threw mine in there too. It was cold just standing there all dry. I couldn't imagine being all wet having been down in that ice water. And somewhere between the empathy and the better him than me feelings, my mind shouted, "My tacos! I sure hope they don't get smushed." Then it hit me. A man had nearly died, and here I was thinking about lunch. There he was, knocking on heaven's door, and I was worried about the structural integrity of my cast iron breakfast tacos. But y'all, those tacos, they were hot and perfect. The tortillas soft, the eggs fluffy, the sausage salty. The cheese melted down into every bite like it had a personal stake in my happiness. And that taco sauce had just enough sting to make a man sit there and blink slow. They weren't just good. They were the kind of good that could make a man briefly rearrange his priorities. So yes, it felt like moral whiplash. I did feel bad, but I also felt like if my tacos got mashed flat in my jacket pocket, this morning was going to take entirely too much from me. They used the lull to haul him back toward the parking area where the ambulance was waiting, sirens steadily screaming. It was just too muddy for that ambulance to come onto the job site, and we never saw that pipe fitter again. After the workday and back in the motel room, eating drive-through off the $59, $79, 99-cent menu, a Mexi Supreme tostada or something like that, and saving a fistful of taco sauce packets for tomorrow's breakfast, I kept seeing him fall, the slip, the drop, the sound of the crack of his back on that ice. Worm had been right. This wasn't work you grew old in. This was work you got out of, if you got out. 2 years later, in January 1994, I started pre-nursing school, English 101, college algebra, and the usual classes that don't look like much at the time but end up opening doors you didn't even know were there. I remember sitting in the lobby outside my first English class, earlier than everyone else so I wouldn't miss anything, eating a breakfast taco filled with a poached egg, sausage, bell peppers, and cheese that I'd packed for my breakfast, with 3 more in my bag for lunch. I still didn't know exactly what kind of man I was becoming, but I knew I was glad not to be spending the rest of my life on jobs where one bad step could send you straight through the ice below. Looking back now, that circuit breaker breakfast feels like the last skillet meal of my old life, the final bite before the road bent in a different direction. I didn't know it then, still sitting there in my steel-toed boots by headlights with taco sauce on my fingers. That wasn't just feeding the man I was also cooking for the man I would soon become. Okay, I'm going to walk you through this skillet breakfast. Beer and iron circuit breaker taco breakfast. It also makes a pretty fine lunch, provided it don't get smushed somewhere between here and noon. This is the skillet meal that fed my young pipe fitter self at dawn and kept me upright through 12-hour days in a steel mill winter that had no sympathy for poor life choices. Get your groceries out and ready. This is a one skillet meal. With one exception, you'll need a lid, or a griddle pulling double duty to cover things while the eggs poach. Think of the lid as the hard hat, and the safety man's always lurking, even in the kitchen. Let me give you a rundown on the ingredients so you get a good idea. Don't bother writing all this down. There's a printable recipe at beerandiron.com. That way you can look organized without actually being organized. You'll need a ½ pound of breakfast sausage. If it comes in patties, that's fine. Figure about 8 patties to a pound and use 4. No need to overthink it. You also want 1 cup of frozen bell peppers, partially thawed. You can use fresh, but frozen brings a little moisture, and we like that because we're about to fake a poaching situation in a skillet. But if you like a little crunch, go fresh and live your truth. Crack 6 eggs in a single container and keep the yolks intact. Handle them like they've got feelings. Chop up 2 to 4 green onions. We're going to use the white and light green parts in the skillet and save the dark green tops for garnish, because we like to pretend we're all fancy right at the end. Now potatoes. 3 thawed hash brown patties. Use patties. I'm serious here. Here's the deal. Starch sticks. It always has and it always will. Your skillet isn't broken, and if it sticks, you didn't mess up. That's just how starch behaves. Loose shredded hash browns? Bad idea. Fresh potatoes? Also a bad idea. We're not making a glue experiment. Use the patties. 3 of them will just about fit perfectly in your skillet like they were meant to be there. You're going to want a half cup to a full cup of shredded cheese. What kind? Well, that's dealer's choice. Go ahead and shred the full cup, because there's a very good chance some of it won't survive the weight. I know how this goes. You'll also need salt, black pepper, chili powder, and smoked paprika, all to taste. Measure with your heart, or at least some level of accountability. This makes enough for 4 to 6 tacos, depending on how aggressive you get with the filling. I'd plan on 6 if you want room for sour cream, taco sauce, and those green onion tops we saved earlier, like responsible adults. And if you're wondering how we're going to poach 6 eggs in the middle of all this chaos, I'll give you the scoop in a minute. Stay tuned. First, get your number 8, your 10.25-inch cast iron skillet, hot over medium to medium-high heat. Brown and break up the sausage until it's cooked through. Take a look. How much fat do you have left in the pan? Too much? Dab some of it out with a paper towel. Too little? Don't worry about that. Good sausage always takes care of that bit of business, all on its own. Second, add the chopped white and light green parts of the onions and saute them with the sausage until they soften up and start smelling like you know just what you're doing. Third, move everything out of the middle of the skillet. Make room for the hash brown patties. This is when you really need to make sure there's enough fat left in that pan for this part. I usually don't add any extra fat, but I do expect that starch is about to get a little too intimate with that cast iron. A good seasoned skillet will clean up just fine later, and we'll also deglaze it a bit with the moisture we'll be adding before we have to clean it up. But don't use shredded hash browns. They'll turn into mashed potatoes and glue to that pan like they signed a lease. The patties already have a crust, and that crust keeps things in chunks, even if the centers will stick a little bit as we break them up. Either way, expect some stickage. It's not the recipe, it's not your skillet, and it's not your technique. It's the starch. And starch holds on to a cast iron skillet like that pipe fitter held on to that metal pipe down in that pit. Once the hash browns are good and crisp, break them up loosely. Don't turn them into mashed potatoes. Leave some bite-sized pieces. You're going to get a little stickage. That's part of the deal. Fourth, add the bell peppers. Season with salt, pepper, chili powder, and smoked paprika. The thawed peppers will bring just enough moisture. Perfect. Let everything heat up and come together like a halfway functioning team. Fifth, add about 1/4 cup of beer. Now, I know most folks don't have a beer opened up this early in the morning, and if that's you, broth or water will work perfectly fine, but I do prefer beer. If I'm planning ahead, I save the last little bit from last night's lager, like it's a strategic decision. That is, if you have enough self-control to save that last swallow. A chef's tip here. Keep a mason jar in the fridge for leftover beer. Flat beer is great for cooking. We want bubbles in our glass, for sure, but bubbles are optional in the skillet. 6. Now for the eggs. Once everything is mixed, gently make 6 little dimples in our ingredients. Don't go tearing up those potatoes. And pour in the eggs one by one. Easy does it. If a couple of eggs decide to crowd together, that's fine. They'll sort it out later. Turn the heat down and cover the skillet with a lid or your griddle until the whites are mostly set and just starting to creep over the yolks. And don't worry, I haven't forgotten that cheese. I just haven't trusted you with it yet. I usually use the griddle as my lid. It doubles as a place to warm my tortillas while the eggs set. Lay them on that griddle, cover them up with a couple of damp paper towels. This way they won't dry out. But still, keep an eye on that bottom one. It's always the first one to try something sketchy. Keep a casual eye on those eggs. Add a splash or more of beer, broth, or water if needed, but just a little. We're going for steam, not taco soup. 7. Once the egg whites are mostly set, scramble everything together. Break the yolks and fold them into a hearty, slightly chaotic hash. Add whatever cheese survived your snacking and cover just long enough for it to melt. Divide the scramble amongst 6 tortillas. Add your sour cream, green onion tops, and that taco sauce. And if you got a notion, wrap 3 up in foil for lunch. That there is present you looking out for future you. Take care of that future you. And that's it, y'all. 1 skillet and a lid, or a griddle doing double duty, and you've got yourself a breakfast for however many folks are standing around. Well, except for that 7th fella. He's going to have to wait his turn or bring his own tortillas. This recipe served me well back then, but you don't have to be living in a motel room to enjoy it. It works fine over a campfire too. Whether in a skillet or in a 10-inch camp cast iron Dutch oven, it does just fine. But what about Blytheville? What about my second work day? On the morning of my second day, the plan was the same, breakfast tacos. So I set the coffee on, SSS, moved the percolator over to the other burner, and started making the filling for my 6 tacos. Waiting on those eggs to poach, I thought about how fast life can turn on you. A fussy pipe fitter and an old man named Worm had already nudged me in a different direction. But even with my mind shifting, I still had a job to do today. So I poured a splash of beer and let it do what it does in a good recipe. It makes something humble taste more than the sum of its parts. It added steam, a little tang, a little depth. Nothing fancy, just enough to make the morning before work feel a little bit more civilized. And that's probably why I still like cooking with beer. Sometimes it isn't there to show off. Sometimes it's there to carry a little flavor, a little warmth, and maybe a little story to the pan. About the time everything was coming together into a nice hash that second morning, I moved my percolator over to that second burner and turned on the knob to warm it up from a thermos. Pop! Dang, I thought. Must be the weather again. Yeah, did I mention I was naive back then? If you want a printable version of the circuit breaker breakfast taco recipe and more cast iron and campfire recipes, head over to beerandiron.com. And don't be a stranger. Y'all, let me know how yours turns out, really. Remember, at Beer and Iron, there's always room for one more at our table. Until next time, may your cast iron never rust and your beer never go flat. We'll see y'all next time at beerandiron.com.